one thing that you said, like I read about you, is you said that sales has changed a lot over the last like 10, 15 years, and you said that at the beginning of the conversation as well.
Yeah.
So from your experience, what has been the biggest change that you've seen? And then I've got a COVID follow up for after that, because I think some things might have changed completely now as well.
Yeah, there's a few things that have changed. So sticking aside from COVID, but from the last recession, there are a few things that have been changed. Number one, there's a heck of a lot of salespeople out there, far more than what there used to be. And the problem is, and you hinted at this actually with your last question, which is there's no standard for sales. Unfortunately, with for example, to become a doctor, there is a pretty much global, some sort of global standard that you have to achieve to be able to be a good doctor. Same with legal profession, same with the engineering. Sales doesn't have that, which means that there are a lot of, I don't want to say lacks, but there's a lot of gaps that people squeeze into. And because of that, you come across some unethical behaviors, or maybe not unethical, but behaviors that are substandard. So because of that, buyers have now been exposed to so much of that, and it's created a perception about the rest of sales. Technology has only exacerbated that situation, because with social media, with emails, and the proliferation of all those things, far easier to have some sort of touch with a buyer, and it's far easier for that buyer to now be exposed to some of those less than effective methods of communication that buyers are using. So that sellers are using, sorry. So buyers have become more resistant, far more resistant to sales approaches, which means that salespeople have to become even more creative in how they approach it, right? And they really have to think outside the box. The other trend that's happened is that there are far more people involved in the decision-making process than ever before. A few years ago, CB, which is now part of Gartner, did a research, and they found that in the average complex purchasing process, and by complex we mean things like consultancy services, not just aerospace and defense and the big industrial. It's like consultancy services, things like that. Not things where it costs maybe a few thousand, but we're talking 20, 30,000 and above. There were on average about 6.8 people involved in the decision-making process, right? That was up from 18 months. They did that same research 18 months before, and the average was 5.4. So it's moved up from 5.4 to 6.8 just within 18, 24 months. And that's grown again. So what that means is there's just far more people involved in the decision-making process. It's more complex, it takes more time, and it also unfortunately means that they coalesce around common denominating factors for any solution. And the most blunt one is price, right? So that's not easy for it. So the salesperson has to now deal with more people and more varying personalities and more varying interests, right? It's not 6.8 people all within IT if you're selling an IT solution. No, it's IT, it's marketing, it's finance, it's HR, it's varying interests. And if you think each one of them have different MBOs, different performance-related reviews, very different interests. So you're now having to speak to every one of them and align what you're doing to all. So sales cycles have now become a lot longer. The last recession has made people more aware of options. So it's so much easier to start a company now. And there's higher levels of competition on average, right? Not every industry, but on average, there's higher levels of competition. That means that it's very hard for a buyer to be able to differentiate between one and the other. So the seller has to now differentiate through other methods and get very clear about what makes them different from everyone else. Not just the product and service, but them as the salesperson themselves. Because as I said earlier, your knowledge is hugely valued as a salesperson to the buyer, not just your product and service. The other thing is that and this is the biggest one actually, there is so much information out there. Blogs, articles, like it's so easy to just share information now. the buyer is now more confused than ever about what decision they should be taking. And if you go slightly earlier in the process of decision making, they have a problem figuring out which information is reliable to learn from. So the buyer now spends such a huge amount of time researching that it's just overwhelming, and it's taking them away from their day job. So they're frustrated by that. And they're frustrated by the fact that they have to validate the data more, even more, validate the sources, validate what they're saying. There's a survey that was done by CEB, but also done by a bunch of other companies like CSO Insights, Forrester, all of those. And what they'd say, and the number's not too important, some are 50%, some are 57%, some are 60%. The number's not too important. What is important is that when your buyer contacts you or they're ready to speak with you, it means that they are over half of the way through their buying process. It means that they've already made a decision or an opinion or created an opinion about which solution is going to be right for them. So now you as the buyer, if they're engaged with you or they've contacted you or they're willing to accept a call, chances are that you're now going to be commoditized. They've made a decision or an opinion about what they need, and now they're trying to see if you fit within there, and therefore can they get it at a better rate, better price. So that puts you as a salesperson at a disadvantage. So there's a few things there, right? Number one, more salespeople, more buyers are involved in the process. Number two, so much information out there, which means that buyers are confused, right? And they have a hard time trusting salespeople. Number three, the trusting is a bigger issue, but let's put that separately. They find it harder to trust salespeople. Number four, they're already more than halfway through the buying process, which means that you're no longer influencing them like we used to back in the 90s and early 2000s. Someone else is influencing. Right? So those four things put you at quite a bit of a disadvantage. Those are the trends that are happening since 2008. Do you want me to talk about what COVID's done?
Yeah,
to add on to that?
Yeah, because
Right.
I was just thinking over these last couple of months, like I've been working on the podcast, but I have a lot of my friends that are still in sales, and I was just thinking, like, how are you selling during this time? Because no one wants to spend money if companies are closing down. Everyone's trying to, salaries are getting cut. So how do you still? I can imagine selling during the last 6 months and probably continuing on for a while. It's going to be a lot more challenging than it was before, because all these things that you've said on top of all these financial struggles and difficulties.
Yeah. Well, the first thing we've got to do is change the language, right? Which is change your language away from saying no one is buying anymore to questions, right? If you ask yourself a good question, you're going to find a good answer. If you ask yourself a bad question or a lousy question, you're going to get a lousy answer. So if I say, how can I possibly sell when no one else is buying? That's a lousy question. But what I could ask myself is, okay, we're in a challenging situation. Who is buying right now? Who is thriving due to COVID? And how can I get them to see the value of what we have to offer? And that's going to help them. See, that's a totally different question to the first one, right? And I've got to tell you, Don, it's not that there are no one's buying, right? It's just that there are different people buying now, right? Okay. And companies and salespeople now have to pivot. Now, if you have a specific set of territory, right, and it's very hard in which to do that, I can guarantee you that there are still people who are buying. You just got to find out who they are. So first thing that I advise companies, and this is not anything groundbreaking, right, is double down on your clients. They already know you, they already trust you, they've already made the decision with you. In fact, in situations where people are trying to create certainty in an uncertain world, right? So have you ever noticed that when there's loads of uncertainty, we just go back into what's certain, right? We cut corners, not cut corners, but we stop spending on certain things that we feel are nice to have, and we stay on what we think are need to have, right? We're trying to create certainty when everywhere around us is a huge amount of uncertainty. That means that your buyers are not going to leave you. right? Or you have to do something really, really bad for them to want to leave you. Because right now, they cannot afford to create uncertainty in their business. They are trying to consolidate certainty, right? So double down on your buyers. The second reason why you need to double down on your buyers is because, or your existing clients, not buyers. The second reason why you need to double down is don't give them a reason to put you into the nice to have category.
Okay.
Because they're going to decide who is a nice to have versus a need to have, who is absolutely necessary versus we can do without them for now. Do not give them the excuse to put you into that nice to have category. So double down on your relationships with them. Double down on the value that you give them. Double down on your advice in how you're going to help them navigate out of the situation and create more stability through what your products and your services. The third reason why you need to really double down on your clients is because they are going to be your greatest source of growth. Upsells, cross-sells, etc. They are more likely going to buy from you than from a new business. I think the figure is that they're 5 times more likely to buy from you than a new business person, right? So if you are involved in working with clients, if you're an account manager or if you have a hybrid role where you do both, focus the majority of your time on stabilizing that client base, because doing that is going to help you grow. So that's the first thing that I advise in the COVID world. It's not groundbreaking or brand new, but what's groundbreaking and new is the method by which you do that, because a lot of companies don't do that necessarily so well. The second thing is the COVID situation. Selling through virtual like this is so unfamiliar and unnatural to both parties. And there are a whole host of techniques. In fact, I did an interview with Mark Bowden just the other week, which you know, if your listeners want, I can share the link to that. It's recorded. But you know him obviously from your body language, right? Just for anyone who's listening, he's regarded as the #1 expert in the world in human behavior and body language. In fact, former FBI agents say he's just like the best in the game. And there are techniques that you can use to influence and make your buyer feel comfortable, as well as make yourself feel comfortable during a Zoom call, right? Some are technical things like, you know, having lights around you and having some space, something interesting around you, rather than being close up like this, for example. That makes a huge difference, right? You can see up my nose. Hopefully I've trimmed my nose hair, right? And versus here, you're far more open, far more welcome, right? And you have to use more gestures, right? You're going to have to become more extrovert in what you do. And there are various technologies and techniques that you can use. But nothing has, even in the face of all of this, nothing has really changed from the very, very first things that I said are important to engage with your buyer. Do your research, right? Now is the time to stand out from every other bad salesperson out there. In recessions, have you noticed, well, what you will notice is in this recession, it exposes the extremities in our world, i.e. the bad and the good. Noticing the bad and the good becomes so much easier in recessions. Unethical people, unethical business models, right? Wirecard, for example. Those things become far more clearer during a recession. But the great ones also stand out in a recession. So do your research, right? Use technology like video platforms to send emails, for example, right? There are so many techniques out there you can use to get attention, right? So double down on the things that makes a salesperson a great salesperson, right? I call it business person before salesperson, right? Be that business person to your buyer far more than what you used to be, right? Get to know the industry, get to know what they're going through, figure out how you're going to help them thrive when everyone else around them in their industry is finding it tough. you do that one thing there and you think about that one thing and ask yourself that question, which is, how can we help our clients grow while everyone else is probably declining? And I would almost guarantee, and if you answer those questions correctly, I would almost guarantee that you're going to have more success than someone who isn't asking those kind of questions. That's really what you need to think about. Over and above what I've just said, go back to what makes you great, right? Do your research, know the person you're talking to, figure out how you're going to be able to help them, and figuring out a way of engaging with them with even more of a jolt, right? Even more of a bolt that will actually help them notice you and take attention and kind of observe, and then ask questions. They want to learn more from.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And I think it's such an interesting approach to be doubling down on the clients you have, maintaining them and upselling through them rather than seeking out new business. Because naturally, I think in sales, for the majority of people, it's about generating new business unless you're on the partner side, where it's about upselling usually through, your partners and the
Yeah.
relationships that you have. So it's interesting to make, it's almost like a counterintuitive shift, but not really. You're just focusing more on what you currently have. And I think that's really, really interesting that, you look at it from that perspective. One
And
thing that,
I'm not saying just forget about new business,
no, of course,
right?
yeah.
And it's important to make that distinction, because sometimes people hear what I say and they think, well, what about new business? I'm not saying forget about it. I'm saying get your clients in order, right? Don't forget that. That's huge, right? As a business. But by the way, if you get your clients in order, what does that mean? It means more testimonials. It means more referrals, right? It means, they're going to have people in their community that they can refer you to. It means you're going to be able to create symposiums around them and invite new business, right? So doing that well is only going to help your new business process anyway, right? So yeah, I just wanted to make that distinction and clarity.
No, for sure.